Hi there, everybody. We're going to get started in just a couple of moments. But for those of you who are early birds, I'm waiting for the number to tick up a little bit more. We have about 90 people registered for the webinar. And so those of you who are early birds, why don't you go ahead and find the chat box, which should be at the bottom of your screen, and enter your name and your school or program that you are in, as well as the position or title you hold. And we'll get started that way in just a minute. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody. My name is Adriana Sanchez-Aldana. I'm the Executive Director of CCAE, the California Council for Adult Education. And it's my pleasure to welcome you this afternoon to the second in our series of Learn at Lunch. I know it's not lunchtime right now. I hope you've already had your lunch. It's already 2 o'clock, but this is the exception to our general time that we hold these webinars. And thank you for being flexible with us today. We think you're really going to enjoy today's webinar. And so just as informational piece of information here that I have for you, CCAE's intent with our brief webinar series, and you can advance the slide, Kathy, is to bring to you topics of current interest and relevance, and that will help build meaningful connections in this most interesting and challenging of times to build connections. We're starting to learn how to build those connections with webinars and online and so forth, but we think that these topics are still relevant and important, and you need to be informed about them. We need to be informed about them, and so that's why CCAE is bringing you this brief series. I'd like to give a great deal of credit to Branca Marchetta, who is the director of the CAREC Consortium and in Sacramento, and she is also member at large on the CCAE executive board, and she has done all kinds of work to make sure that these webinars and informational pieces come to you because, of course, we're not able to have a state conference this year, and professional development and learning is what adult education is always about. We're lifelong learners ourselves, as well as what we're encouraging our students to do. So it was really important, and Branca just took a hold of the project and moved forward with it. So I thank her very much for doing that. I'd also like to thank David Palmer, our CCAE office manager, for ensuring that all of the details behind the scenes work together, and also making sure, that means in particular the technology. Okay, as you can see, the dates on the second part of the slide are dates of our upcoming webinars, so mark your calendars. As it suggests, our webinars will be held once or twice a month. Our next one will be Tuesday, October 13th at noon. We go back to noon, and that will be the GED testing service will provide some great information. And although we're only scheduled through November at this point, one in October, 2 in November, we're looking to at least include one more topic for the month of December. So keep tuning in, and you'll get the updates on that as well. And also note that sign up for the next webinar, the upcoming one in October, will be out in a week or so, because we've got a couple of weeks before that one, okay? But at least a week ahead of time, just sign up on the CCAE website for that, okay? Kathy, next slide. So before we get started, I have a couple of logistical items for you. And if you were on our webinar last time, you'll know that everybody's lines are muted. So but we are recording the session. And if you do have a question to ask, please put that question in the chat area, and one of our presenters, Leanne Fong-Batkin, will be monitoring the chat box and will help with that, either to answer at that moment or at the end of the webinar. And no questions will go unanswered. If there are so many questions that we can't get to them by the end of the webinar, there will be a follow-up to make sure that everybody's questions are answered. We also have a brief poll at the end of the webinar, so hang in there, and as you're directed to the poll, please answer a couple of questions so that we can ensure that we're meeting your needs as well. So this is really important to us, okay? So my agenda, first and foremost, I have a couple of announcements for you from CCAE. Oh, wait a minute. Did I mention that this webinar is being recorded, and also that we are on Facebook Live? Just wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. So my announcements will happen in the agenda, and then Kathy Booth will be providing an overview of the Cradle-to-Career system and its tools and how they are creating community involvement and other opportunities for the field to get involved, and then question and answers, of course. So if we get to my announcements on the next slide, Kathy, again, always first and foremost on the list, membership, membership, membership. You haven't received your email yet. I told you last time that we would be sending an email out, an e-blast. Hasn't happened yet. Be on the lookout for it. It is coming. We want all of our members to re-enroll, become members again for this year. It's a little bit of a different year. We all know that. So we want to make sure and stay involved and stay engaged with CCAE. Really important. And definitely want you to make sure that if you know somebody on your team that's not a member, encourage them to join. Their membership, they can join at any time now, as CCAE's membership year has changed from July 1 to June 30th. We're not doing that any longer. It's a 365-day rolling membership, so that you will be sure to receive your membership benefits all year long for a full year. So that's really important. One other announcement that I see up there that was added, and I forgot to mention it, is that our webinars are in the archives on our ccaestate.org website. And all you have to do is go to the website, and then there's a pull-down tab that says, I believe, events, and then webinars. And just go to that tab and you'll find our archive of our webinars, okay, so that you can see them again. I mentioned membership renewals, and then just a little word again on advocacy. Advocacy is an ongoing thing. And right now, in the era of learning at a distance and not leaving your home if you don't have to, telecommuting, using Zoom Classroom or Microsoft Teams or whatever you're using to work with your students. I know that our legislators are not having their coffees and their socials the way they usually do, but they are having Zoom meetings. And so again, stay in touch with your local legislators. If you're not already on their email list, sign up for their email list, because they will notify you. I know I got a notification from one of my local legislators, state legislators recently, about a coffee Zoom event. And so, you know, be engaged with them, let them know that you're there, let them know all of the good things you're doing with adult education in spite of all of the safeguards that are needed for the pandemic. Let them know that we are still making progress, engaging our adults, and our adults are achieving results. It's important for them to hear this. And again, what better time than a Zoom event with your legislators, since you can't get to a coffee hour or invite them to your program very easily. But invite them to your Zoom classroom if you'd like. That might be something that they'd be interested in seeing. Anyway, so remember to advocate locally at this point. One last announcement that I have is to set aside December 4th on your calendar. It's a Friday afternoon, late afternoon, evening. As you know, we were unable to hand out or distribute awards this year because we generally do that at the state conference. So our 2020 awardees were not recognized this year, and we'd really, really like to recognize them before the year is over. So we are planning an event, of course, at a distance on Zoom, but we're planning an event where we will see our awardees be recognized. So mark your calendar for that. We're very excited about it and happy that our 2020 awardees will not be unapplauded, okay? So that's important. So let's go on to the next slide so that we can get started with our presentation for today. Our guest presenters today are Kathy Booth, and as you can see, she is the Project Director, Educational Data and Policy for WestEd, and I venture to say she's the lead on the Cradle-to-Career data initiative, and she'll be sharing her information with us. And also working with Kathy is Leanne Fong-Batkin, Senior Project Manager also at WestEd. And Leanne has extensive background in the Department of CDE and Chancellor's Office and managing programs, and she'll be handling the questions for Kathy as well. So I'd like to thank both of these ladies so much for allowing us to be a part of their schedule. They're very, very busy working on Cradles to Career, and so I really appreciate their giving us an opportunity to learn more about their work. So go ahead, Kathy.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, I really feel like I owe a debt to the adult ed community. I was looking at you all chatting in who was there. I recognized a lot of names, people I had a chance to work with. I really cut my teeth understanding intersegmental data, working on the adult education pipeline for the launch board and working on some of the crosswalking of the core skills in literacy and numeracy between K-12 adult ed and community colleges, both in credit and non-credit. And I just sort of feel like you all are at the heart of our communities, really helping create that space where everybody has a chance to learn and grow. And so I'm really honored to get to talk with you today and tell you about this exciting new data system that's under development. So what I want to do is start out by just clarifying what the Cradle-to-Career data system is. There's been so much pent-up demand for us to link data between different providers. We have this problem that we know who we're serving and our students, who our students are, or participants are in the classroom or our counseling offices, but we don't always know what happens when they leave us. And the purpose of this data system is to begin to fill in some of those gaps. So for clarity, my role is that I'm a process facilitator. So I'm part of a group that is trying to put together sort of the criteria for what it would take to develop this intersegmental data system. So where it came from is that there was a piece of legislation that was passed back in 2019, and that act sort of created this idea that we would be linking together data from a number of existing data sources. So this kind of a data system exists in almost every state in our country, just not in California. And that might seem like a bad thing, but it's actually a wonderful opportunity, because normally when states start to link data together, they just start out with conventional K-12 and post-secondary information. But what California wants to do is to create something that's much more expansive and really link together not just conventional K-12 to post-secondary, but to look much more broadly at how it is that people get education at various points in their lives, how that influences their outcomes in the workforce, and the critical role that social services play in providing supports that enable people to reach their goals. So because this is a bigger and more complicated thing that has been done in other states or has been done to date in California, the act basically said that there was going to be an 18-month planning process, so a pretty extensive time period to really dig through all of the components of what it would take to build this type of data system. So WestEd is working on behalf of the governor's office to lead that planning process, and it's going to run through June of next year. So really, I think that some of the key issues that we're trying to deal with is that California has an incredible amount of data about the people that are benefiting from a range of services, from early learning through, conventional school to alternative ways of providing education and into the workforce, but we don't have any way to connect those information. And as a result, we're always looking sort of through a keyhole at a piece of what's needed. And because of that, it's really hard to understand what it is that is most in the way and what helps people be successful. So we know at a broad brush what it is. This is why we're having protests about structural racism in our society right now. But we want to get down to granular things that would really make a difference. We need to have these data be linked and to be able to look in fairly nuanced ways at the constellations of experiences that people have moving through society and moving through educational institutions. And the purpose of linking the data is not just because it would be interesting to know things about students, but really deeper issues about what can we do to change that. So we don't want to just look at a group of people and say, well, we can identify this characteristic that they don't yet speak English fluently, or they're a person with a disability, and that explains their whole experience. We really want to figure out things that information that we can put together that would make a difference in helping those individuals get to their goals and helping us be better as practitioners in supporting them in that work. So this planning process, because there are so many things that we want to link together, is incredibly broad. So not only did the legislation name 16 different state agencies that, as you can see, really span this whole trajectory of people's lives. So starting with early learning and care, moving through education, looking at the context that surrounds education, such as financial aid and the way we prepare our teachers, looking at employment, both in terms of the earnings and occupations of people, but going beyond that, truly looking at all the different ways that we provide alternative training, different types of social services and health services, and of course, people who really understand the data, all part of this planning process. And they're working hand in glove with the people that are going to be the users of the data system. So we have 2 different advisory groups that are looking at different concepts, the data that we need to do research studies versus the data that we need to inform day-to-day practice. We also have a whole host of subcommittees that are based on different types of expertise. And those subcommittees also include members of the public. They're not just people from the state agencies. So all told, there's about 100 people that are involved in this planning process. And they've really committed an incredible amount of time, which to me shows how committed everybody is to making this data system a reality. So we're about 9 months into the planning process thus far, which, again, speaking to the level of commitment of the people that are part of this process, is that we were just getting rolling when the pandemic hit. We are working with the agencies that are on the front lines in working with the communities that are being most impacted by COVID and the economic outcomes, by the realization that we really need to stand up to structural racism in our society. And yet people have continued to pour time and energy into the process to make sure that we are going to meet the original timelines that were laid out in the legislation. So we've made some really important decisions so far. The first is the mission and vision for the data system, which may seem like a small thing, but it's actually incredibly important, because when we started the planning process, no 2 people seemed to have the same idea of what the data system was going to be or who it was really for. So getting people to really get together and understand why we would connect data and what we want to do with it was critical. We've been able to identify what those core products are going to be. So it's all well and good to connect data. This is what many states have done. But that doesn't necessarily mean that anybody can use the data. And that is the most common complaint about longitudinal data systems in other states. So we figured out what it is that's going to enable the data to come out of that system. We have figured out some of the basics of how we're going to put it together technologically, which is often a topic that people spend a lot of time thinking about when they think about intersegmental data. And they've basically come up with a structure that's going to allow a lot of flexibility. And finally, they've decided where this data system is going to live, and that's going to be within the Government Operations Agency, or GovOps, which is part of our state infrastructure, which is linked with other things that provide underlying supports like PERS and STIRS to our system. So it really helps ground this data system as a neutral provider of information to everybody. This fall, we are now beginning to dig down deeper now that we know what it is we're building. So we're figuring out exactly what types of data elements are going to be available. We're deciding what are the most important questions that need to be answered using the data system. We're figuring out how that managing entity at GovOps is going to do its work and how it's going to be governed to make sure that we're really paying attention to the mission and vision that have been articulated. And then going forward, we're going to get even more granular. So by the end of this 18 months, we're going to have basically a blueprint put together that would enable this system to hopefully get right off the ground after we finish the planning process in July, with the hopes that we'd have some funding allocated for the next fiscal year for its development. So one of the things that I want to note is that you can go ahead and chat your comments now. You don't have to wait to the end. So if you have questions about this planning process or who's been involved, you can go ahead and put that into the chat. So one of the things that I want to do is just talk a little bit about what those tools are, because it can be difficult to sort of get a sense of what this data system is going to mean for you all, particularly in adult ed, absent that specific context. So first of all, I wanted to put out there that vision and mission that the planning group came up with. So what's really important about these two descriptors is that this data system is intended to be this neutral entity that's making sure that data is connected and broadly available, and that it's really helping us understand what happens to people over long periods of time, which of course is very important in the context of adult education, because we are often working with people in the adult education system that are coming back at various points in their life. And so this data system is designed to recognize that education is not a straight and narrow pathway for most people. I've also highlighted in blue this concept of skills training. So this was really significant when you think about this related to adult education, in that the original legislation was really speaking pretty narrowly to credit-bearing coursework as the concept of what education is. And there was a recognition pretty early on that this data system had to serve more types of education than that. And so this idea of skills training was put in as a shorthand for looking at both adult ed and other types of workforce training that could be available. And this was, of course, reinforced then once we hit the economic downturn after the pandemic came into play. So I think that one of the things that's really important is it means that this concept is unlikely to be lost from the data system and will make it easier to bring adult education data elements more fully into the data system in its development early on. The other thing that's really important about this is that it's really conceiving the data system as being there to support people taking action on it, which means it's not going to stop at the level of just putting the data out there and hoping that you're going to find it somewhere on the web and figure out what to do with it, but rather that the idea is to be providing a lot of supports to help make sure that many people know about the data, it is being provided to them in a manner that's usable to them, and then also there's supports to make sure that people know what to do with it once they're looking at all that rich information that's there. So one of the things that was also really important about the planning process to date is that when people talk about the kinds of information that they need, there's different types of information that different people need. So if you think about yourself as a parent or as an educator, normally when you're looking for information, you want to know whose information you're looking at, right? So if you want to do an intervention and you're trying to figure out how many people that you are teaching are homeless, it's much more useful to know which of those participants are homeless compared to what proportion of your students are homeless. But when it comes to working on policy issues or doing research, looking at long-term trends, we actually need to come up a level and be looking at groups of individuals over time and looking for patterns in what's happening to them. So in most states, data systems are only looking at that second case, the large data sets where we're talking about big groups of people and we're looking for general trends and patterns. What California wants to do is have that system and have a system that gets down to individual level information that can be used to inform interventions with specific people. So let's talk about what those two things are. So we're calling this first idea, the traditional idea of what's in a data system, the analytical tools. So this is really, again, information about big groups. And related to that, what we have is this idea that different people want analytical data in different ways. So some folks are just looking for answers to 1 or 2 questions. They don't need a lot of detail, and it's easier when it's displayed visually. And for that reason, there'd be these easy to use dashboards that would include infographic style visualizations that make it easy to look at it and see what's important right away. In addition to that, there's a number of people that are going to want something that's more sophisticated. They're going to say, well, that's great. I can look at the dashboard, I can get a general sense of things, but I really want to dig in and find out much more about a particular population or a particular institution. And so it would have that capability as well. So you could pull together a bunch of variables and then get from it a summary table that explains sort of what happened to that group of students. And then finally, there'll be a library of research studies that would allow you to really understand what other people had learned out of the data system. And then a process by which you can request additional information. So this is so researchers or people who work at adult schools or colleges could go in and get information that's not available in those public-facing tools to answer those other questions. So you'll note I've got these little balloons to pull out things that are relevant for adult education. So one of the things that's important to understand is that the data system, as what it was envisioned by the legislature, said that in its first phase, because it's going to take a while to build it, all it had to do was link together conventional K-12 and post-secondary information. But the work group felt strongly that that wasn't going to cut it. And so they've actually put in almost all the types of data that you could imagine from the existing partner entities. So they've made it a quite big scope in order to really leverage the power of the information that each of these agencies is carrying. However, there were some decisions made on data sets that were going to be more difficult to integrate. So the K-12 adult education that's data that's in CASAS, some of the WIOA related information that's held through various agencies that tend to report into the Department of Labor are not going to be included in the first phase. However, they will be included in later phases. And in the first phase, we will have the community college non-credit data because the data being submitted by the community colleges will be credit neutral. So you'll get a partial picture that'll come out of this data system in the first phase. So that's all over on the analytical side of the house. On the other side of the house, we've got these things that we're calling operational tools. And what an operational tool is basically something that you can use for practice. So there's 5 basic concepts that the work group prioritized for what those operational tools should be. So the first was that there should be college and career planning tools and curriculum that are available to all students who are preparing to go into post-secondary. So in the beginning, these tools are going to be mostly focused on those that are in high school preparing to apply to college for the first time. However, there's elements of this curricula that would be still relevant for your GED students, for some of your adults that may be willing just to go back, and even if the materials are sort of crafted for teenagers, still are looking for some of those fundamental questions about identifying their core interests and skill sets and using that to determine what they might want to do related to college and career. In addition to that, there'll be some tools that are, again, focused on high schools that are about monitoring eligibility for 4-year institutions. Those are the A to G requirements. The third component is the ability to create electronic transcripts. So this, of course, is something that COVID has made very clear to us, that it's been very difficult for institutions to share information with each other about what students have already done, and putting that online would help a lot. But most importantly for adult education, those electronic transcripts are not only going to be, your credit-bearing coursework, but they're going to have the capability to include non-traditional learning artifacts. So things like badges and competency-based education. In addition to that, there's this idea that when an individual is applying to a post-secondary institution, that they should have the ability to share their social service history if they choose. This is completely in the control of the individual, that they might be able to say when applying to, say, a community college, to say, I have historically received CalWORKs or CalFresh or Medi-Cal, or I am a foster youth. And that information would be pulled from the state and sent directly to the college that verifies that information in a way that would make it easier for that post-secondary institution to provide a wraparound set of supports that would make it easier for that student to stay in school, because fundamentals like food and housing and medical care could be taken care of. And then finally, because we're looking at that issue of the college eligibility monitoring, some support for data cleanup at high schools, mostly related to those A to G eligibility requirements. So I want to pause for a second. Leanne, are we getting questions showing up in the chat?
Yes, I just sent you one.
Okay. Let's see. Could you actually read it out for those who might not be able to see the chat?
Oh, that's right. Yes. So Laura asked if the focus is mostly going to be on community colleges, but not adult ed K-12.
So in the first phase, the focus is more on credit-bearing course pathways. So we get the bonus of the non-credit coursework being there for the community colleges in the first phase. In a later phase, we'll look at the inclusion of CASAS data that's more relevant for K-12 related adult schools.
Good for now.
Okay. So let's talk about some examples of specifics that would be in those different resources. So we've talked a little bit about how there's going to be these dashboards, which are really going to be focusing on infographics, things that make it easy to see what's important about a lot of data, allow you to contextualize information either by looking at trends over time or being able to disaggregate and looking at different groups of students and seeing what happens to them that might be different from each other. We also want to make sure that the dashboard looks at things at a variety of geographic levels. So you could look at the whole state of California, you could look at information regionally, and you could also see results by local institutions. So for example, if you were trying to figure out for a specific high school in your area, how many of those students apply to get accepted to enroll and stay in post-secondary, you'd be able to see that information at your high school level, or you could look at your whole region or the state. So some of the things that have already been flagged as content for what would be in the dashboards, in addition to that one that topic I already mentioned, might be issues of how many students are eligible for financial aid but don't apply, or apply and they're told they can get it, but that they don't actually take the aid. That might be one thing that we could look at. We could look at the question of when students who are in community college transfer to a four-year institution, do they successfully earn a bachelor's degree? As well as how much do those students earn after they leave the four-year institutions. Now we're looking at multiple connections of data points. So community college to a four-year institution to employment. And you can imagine down the road something similar for adult education, where you might see like starting in a K-12 adult school, maybe transitioning into credit or non-credit coursework in a community college, getting into a credit pathway, getting an associate's degree for transfer, heading out to a four-year university, and then getting on to employment. So really you have the ability to track some of those much longer term trajectories that are also relevant for adult education. Some of the examples of the content that would be in the query builder. So remember, this is something that's going to be allowing for a lot more granular information that is it's basically up to the user to decide what goes into it. So you can imagine a scenario where you're trying to put together a complex understanding of an issue. So let's say we're talking about community college transfer students, and we want to know who is it that's making it to transfer. So you could imagine this if you're looking even at like non-credit students and thinking about, do we actually successfully build those pathways to credit and therefore to transfer from that point? So you might be able to pull a group that would pull people that have been in non-credit and then who were in credit, and then look at what was happening related to whether they were prepared for transfer or whether they transferred. And you could select all sorts of additional variables. So you could look at the student's educational goal. You could look at what their major was. You could look at their course taking patterns, or how prepared they were when they transferred, or what kind of award they had earned, and whether they were enrolled in multiple institutions, as a way to really, really get a better understanding of what are all the variables that are going into some of those transfer outcomes. So you could pick and choose from this list, and then it would put together a data table for you or a chart that would give you sort of high-level answers about the number of students that attained those milestones or outcomes that you selected based on the students that you specifically selected. So you can just imagine the power behind that. It would allow you to go in and get initial answers using descriptive statistics of just sort of like what is the relationship of this variable to another, that could help drive some more nuanced research that you might do with your own students or that you might work with an institutional research office to do at the local level. So now that you've heard a little bit about this, what we're really curious about is your input, because one of the things that we wanted to do is make sure that we're on target. So I realize this may be a little frustrating, especially for those of you from K-12 adult schools, because you're not going to be served well in the first phase or as well as some other institutions, but you can certainly hopefully see the possibilities. So one of the things I wanted just to pose to you all is, although those college and career planning tools are designed for high school students, I'm curious about whether you might find something like that valuable as you're thinking about the ways that you could serve your adult ed participants. You can go ahead and use the chat to chat some of your thoughts there. Not seeing any answers yet. So if you want, you can also start chatting. Oh, looks like we've got some things coming in now. So Tom is saying it looks like we would have no more WIOA follow-up surveys. That is certainly something that is hopeful. One of the challenges is that the source of the employment data that's currently slated for the first phase matches students based on social security number. And so we know for adult education, the numbers of students that are, or participants that are reporting that information is low, and not everyone may have a valid social security number. So there are some limitations on it. But you would certainly have much more information than many schools have right now. Let me go back up. You want to pitch me another question from this, Leanne?
Sure. Lori says that the college and career planning tools are something that they use for their ASC and ESL students along with CTE students, so it's wonderful. Linda says that she's really excited about the electronic transcripts. Margie says that there are plenty of good college and career planning tools already available, and the community colleges have a good one. There's also a comment that says someone would like to see the same data that the K-12 high schools are seeing.
So why don't we go back up to the thing about the curriculum related to college and career planning. So this is definitely true. I know that some adult schools are using Get Focused, Stay Focused, which is an excellent curriculum, absolutely. I think the idea was that for many institutions, it's not a given that they have these tools. And so by making a common set of tools available, it allows people to scale things that are already in existence. And one of the things that's helpful about this tool in particular, so that the idea is to scale something called California College Guidance Initiative. They've been working in across the state for a long period of time, so they've got a lot of the infrastructure for it. It allows students to record what their plans are, and for that information to be shared with the practitioners who are working with them, which can then support them in some of the work that they would do related to tracking whether those students are on target. However, you don't have to use that college and career curriculum. The high schools would be able to use the tracking tools related to whether students are taking the right A to G classes in addition, but that isn't necessarily as relevant potentially for some of the students who are aiming for community college as opposed to a four-year institution.
Kathy, we have another question about the idea of about the timeline for phase 2. Says that adult ed K-12 really needs this data.
Yes, you do. And so one of the things that when I had agreed to come talk, I'm going to spend a little bit of time telling you about some the Launchboard Adult Ed pipeline, because it does have some of this data already, which helps sort of fill the gap for the fact that this is going to happen a little bit later down the line for adult ed. And there's actually, well, I'll just go straight to it. It's actually really important that you all work on making sure your data is in the best possible shape. So one of the reasons that the operational tools include this issue of data cleanup in high schools is because some of those flags that indicate whether courses met A to G requirements, which are required for four-year institutions, public institutions, are wrong at the local level. And you all know this better than anyone. It's not that anyone's trying to flag the course wrong. It's just that this got handed to someone who has 5 other jobs, and then maybe some of the rules changed and no one went back and double checked. So you can end up with these things that are issues of capacity that lead to the data not being as accurate as it could be. And the unintended consequence of that is that a student can get accepted to UC and then have that acceptance rescinded because they didn't actually take the right courses, even though everybody thought they had at the time. There are very similar issues that bedevil adult ed data. So you all have the least resources of anybody, and nobody thinks to sort of invest in data systems for adult education generally when people are talking about educational reform. And you've got some of the biggest challenges related to your data because you're working with populations that come in and out, who often have reasons to not tell everything about themselves. And so trying to collect that information in a way that helps people feel safe and ensures the data are accurate is extra challenging. So the work that you do right now to improve the quality of the data that you have access to, or that you are helping put into state data systems, whether it's CASAS or the shift in the community colleges now to improve the data that you submit to MIS, which is the primary data system for community colleges, will mean that when your data goes into Cradle-to-Career, it's going to be in much better shape, which means it'll be much more actionable, which is really important because there's nothing worse than getting information, bad information, and making a decision based on an error of fact.
Kathy, there's a question someone asked about the use of tracking folks without SSNs. Can you address that?
So one of the things that'll be really powerful about this system in general, connecting of data points, is that it won't use social security numbers as the primary match. So the recommendation is to work with sort of state-of-the-art technology that takes any 2 data elements that different agencies collect and putting it together and ranking how powerful, how strong, how reliable that match is. So that'll make it better and easier to connect information on adult ed students or participants because you're going to have more variables to match on. However, right now, the source that provides the employment related data, which is the Employment Development Department, which by the way gets all of its information from employers that are reporting up for the purpose of what's needed for tracking unemployment insurance contributions. So that's why they focus on social security number, because generally employers would only be reporting into the system people that would be eligible to receive unemployment insurance benefits. And so there's just a structural problem in there. And it's because that data set wasn't designed to help us understand the outcome of adult ed participants. It was designed to help with a social safety net program. And we just get the access to the data as a byproduct. So there's already recommendations coming out of the planning groups to look at alternative ways of collecting employment and earnings data that would be more broad-based, such as from the Franchise Tax Board, which might make it possible to get additional information. Do we have another question?
I have a comment from, looks like Lori. It says that some questions that we want to answer. How successful are our students in their next steps after adult school? So do they get good grades in community college, in which classes, and do they get a certificate or an AA or AS?
Absolutely. Thank you for giving that specificity.
Comment from Linda about using SSIDs and CalPads. I'll let you handle that one.
So right now the idea is that SSID would be one of the variables that would be shared, but it wouldn't be the only variable that would be shared. So we know that there isn't SSID for adult ed students. So, you know, if the student had at some point been in the K-12 conventional system, that information could potentially get matched with them and travel with it, but it's not using SSID as the primary link or unique identifier. Oh, and for those of you who don't know this acronym, SSID is the student ID that is given out by CDE for its conventional K-12 students.
That's all I have for now.
Okay. One of the things that's also really important that we want to be gathering input on is the types of supports that would make it feasible to use the tools effectively. So, you know, we know that groups like CCAE help a lot with professional development. And one of the things that we want to know is just how we could support you in using the information. So what do you find most helpful? I mean, I know right now we're all doing everything online, but have you found that this has been an effective way to share information about resources? Well, the good news is this is not your last opportunity to give input into this. So let me tell you about some other resources that may be helpful for you to know about. So one of the things that I wanted to do is make sure that you did know about the adult education pipeline. So I'm taking off my Cradle-to-Career hat and I'm putting on the role that I played previously, but to that request someone said of what it is you'd like to know about your students, that information actually is already available to you. So the community college put together a data system that's called the launch board. And the idea is that it was the first run at some intersegmental data systems. And it's where I started doing my work, which is why I know enough about it to tell you about it. So I've put up there the web address in case you haven't been on the pipeline already. Some things to know about it is that it's already linked together. The CASAS information from K-12 adult school, non-credit and credit community college data, and the employment data with all the caveats that I just gave you that it's based on Social Security matches. Some of those linkages that have been prototyped and built out in the adult ed pipeline will form a template for what gets put into the Cradle-to-Career data system. Although of course there'll be many more sources of data once that larger system gets built for the state. So similar to the ideas that are coming out of the advisory groups from Cradle-to-Career, the idea is that you can look at information at a lot of different geographic levels. You can look at your district, you can look at your consortia, you can look at your region. And there's also information in there that looks at immediate outcomes about what's happening as students are progressing through adult ed programs, as well as those longer term outcomes about whether they're transitioning into post-secondary, if they're making progress successfully, and if they are completing, and what kinds of certificates or degrees they are completing. As I mentioned earlier, one of the benefits of the existence of this tool that exists right now is that there's no one other than you who will know when your data is wrong. So when a practitioner looks at their own data, they can eyeball something and say, wait a second, that can't possibly be right. I know that we have way more students in our ESL program than that. And so then you can go back and look at the information that you're reporting up either to CASAS or to the Chancellor's Office through MIS, and you can figure out what's wrong. So one of the things that we've seen already is that when the launch board dashboard was built for adult education, there was a realization that the way different colleges were coding critical information about some of their ABE or ASE programs was inconsistent. Neither was wrong, they just weren't the same. And because they weren't the same, there was no way to bring all the data together to make sure that the information was going to be displayable in a way that was consistent across institutions. So one of the things that you can be doing is taking a look for some of those things now so that the data down the line is in better shape. I apologize. I have a cat who is like my Zoom bomber, and he is coming to join us for this session. But back to the point at hand. This is just a couple of screenshots of the kinds of information that are available in the adult education pipeline. So here you see on the left-hand side how you can sort by all those different variables where you can pick your institution. And then there's at the high level information about the programs. So for example, you can see how many people have been served, you can see how many people are in different types of programs, and you can see the types of progress that they are making. Then in addition to this high level information, you can get in and see much more granular information. So for example, on the right-hand side of the screen, what you're seeing is how many of those students are actually making it into post-secondary. And for those for which we have a match, you can see how much they are making after they leave. So this is just an example of some of the types of resources that you could access today to get a better understanding about your students. All right, so let's talk a little bit about community engagement. One of the things that we're doing is making sure that we're getting out and talking to a lot of people. So we're doing presentations just like this right now, but we're also going to be doing a series of webinars in October that are intended to provide more opportunities to give input. So if there's other people that you would like to have learn more about the system or give input about what it should have in it, we are doing a series of different webinars that are really targeted based on people's roles. So we have a series of webinars for educators, a series that are for students and families, and a series that are for data experts. However, it's important to note that because we're really focusing on the phase 1 tools, it may not feel as relevant for all adult school providers, depending on the balance of the type of programs that you provide. So these are the specific webinars that we're going to be holding. So we have the one for data experts that'll be held on October 14th. We've got one for practitioners and educators on the 15th. And then we have 2 different sessions for families, although this will be focused mostly on high school students, and people that are serving high school students will be doing one in English and one in Spanish. You will have a second round of community feedback that we'll be doing in the spring. So when I asked the question earlier about what do you need to be able to use the data effectively, we'll have a whole outreach section that we'll be doing next spring to really get information about that. And those are going to be planned and publicized in December. So if you want to get involved, you can be a co-sponsor for a webinar. You can let people know about this. You can tell us about other opportunities to give presentations. We're always looking for support as we're trying to translate our materials into other languages, and also figuring out ways to help us reach populations that have limited online access. This is, of course, the real challenge of COVID, is that we are so constrained in how we're able to reach people based on their ability to get connected to the internet. All right, so here's a list of resources. There's our website where you can go and read up lots of information about the data tools development process. We have a listserv where you can get alerts about new information that's available. All of our meetings are open to the public. They've all been recorded with transcripts, so you can go in and take a look at it. We have time for public comment in every single meeting, so you can join us via Zoom, or you can always email me or Leanne if you have any questions. All right, so are there any final questions that you want to ask right now? All right, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your creating some space for me to share this information with you. So I'm going to move it over to our presenters, to our hosts, just to finish up the webinar with any other additional announcements they want to make.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Kathy and Leanne. I have to say that this information is so important and valuable, and I know that from the questions that you were receiving that people really want to get involved in what's going on and can see the value of this initiative and this project. So really appreciate that you have taken the time to share this with us, and also shared the your upcoming webinar information. I think we'll get that slide and post it on the CCAE website as a reminder, so that if people want to sign up, get involved, they know when those webinars are. And we know that probably when we start meeting in person, but probably even virtually for conferences and so forth, we'd love to have updates from both of you to see how far we're going and where we are, you know, next steps and so forth. So thank you both so very, very much for sharing this valuable information with us. And I know that one of the questions that I saw that Leanne answered and participant answered was that were there any K-12 adult educators on the advisory teams? And of course, Kathleen Porter, who was also in the audience, I don't know if she still is, but Kathleen Porter, CCAE state president, is on one of the advisory panels, and I think she mentioned which one she's on. And so it's always good to know that we have that, you know, that connection. And as a matter of fact, for those in the field, that's actually how we found out that, you know, we needed to share this information through Kathleen. So, you know, ever vigilant always. So thank you very much, Kathy and Leanne, again for sharing your information with us. Anyway, at this point, my reminders are again that we are being recorded, and that this webinar will be posted on the website in a couple of hours. It takes a couple of hours to download and so forth. And let me see if you have any additional questions. Again, as I said, we'll make sure to share Kathy and Leanne's email so that you can ask them directly and get additional information, or go to the website. I'm sure there's a world of information there as well. One more thing also, I'd like to remind you that we have a PAC, Support K-12 Adult Ed is what it's called, and you can also find information about our PAC on our CCAE state website. And one last piece of information is that I'd like to thank our annual sponsors for supporting K-12 Adult Ed throughout the year and supporting CCAE throughout the year. Those are First Financial Credit Union, GED Testing Service, and Burlington English. And one more thing that was mentioned in the chat that I really appreciate bringing it up, and I think Branka brought that up, is that we are currently in National Adult Education and Family Literacy Week. So thank you very much for those of you who are participating locally or nationally. And again, thank you to our presenters very, very much. We'll see you again on October 13th. Bye-bye. Take care, everyone.